Oh, it's so nice.
I know. Okay, you should be live, Jesse.
Okay, well, I think we're good. All right, welcome to the March 2nd Planning Commission work meeting. We're going to call this to order. Today we have a few things on the agenda. We're going to move the Dover Hill Drive subdivision update up, so we'll hear that first. Then we'll go into additional discussion items and then the general plan update. So let's go ahead and jump into the Dover Hill Drive subdivision if Mike wants to give us an update.
And this is even from your staff memo that I have a few more updates even beyond that. So I'm intending this to just be a brief tonight because the commission will be seeing this again in some form in April at a business meeting where we can take new public hearing. So to update you on this, a few things just project related. Site-wide fault trenching began this week. It began on Monday. Trenching and observation is ongoing with full results expected within 2 weeks. So that's ongoing. I'm going to kind of set that aside for a second, but that kind of plays into the next steps here. Additionally, after the preliminary approval was granted with the 19 or 17 or so conditions of approval, Ivory communicated with staff that the two of the conditions were essentially not workable. They have issues with the condition that eliminated the side setback reduction. And that said, the condition that said no stormwater runoff is allowed in the public park. They have stated that those two components of the development were their response to the city's request to make the park an improved design, retain the pavilion, and provide that trail access. So we have those two pieces of information. Given that, Ivory will be submitting an updated request for public hearing and formal consideration by the commission. This will take place in April. All the neighbors that have received notices previously will receive an updated notice and will prepare updated staff reports. And that will either be for an amended planned unit development application, the one that the commission previously approved, omitting those two conditions that I mentioned. So allowing the 5-foot setback on the sides, plus some utilization of the public park for runoff, or they will proceed with a standard subdivision application. In addition to that, though, we will have fault data by that meeting. And if faults are identified and they'll be located on the updated submittal, regardless of which option comes forward. So however many faults are there and where and the extent of them and all of that data will be available. And that may influence the updated design of either option here as this moves forward. So there will be more information forthcoming in that April meeting. But I think what I wanted to show quickly is obviously the commission is familiar with this concept here. This is the preliminary approval that was granted that shows the enhanced park area, preserving the pavilion and the pedestrian trail connection. This is the planned unit development with the requested 5-foot side setbacks. If they proceed with a standard subdivision concept, this has not been fully reviewed or actually reviewed at all by staff yet because nothing's been submitted. But this is what the concept would look like. It would be a public cul-de-sac off of Summerhill Drive, 4 lots facing Dover Hill and the rest of the lots facing the cul-de-sac. The future city park being the eastern acreage that was offered to the city from the seller of the land. So you can see the clear distinction there of why staff was working with both the seller and Ivory to enhance the park design. So procedurally, I don't know how we'll do this yet. We may see both options presented as 2 separate applications and consider them both. But what has been communicated to us is that the 2 of the conditions of approval that were imposed are not workable for Ivory. They made this PUD in response to the city's request to enhance the park. And that's fine. If the Planning Commission holds firm on those conditions, then a concept, something like this will be put forth for consideration, just following the city subdivision code. And again, if fault lines are identified and wherever they're located, those will be added in. That may affect both of these layouts and may impact the further consideration, which is why we don't want to get too much into it tonight, having that information imminent and having this not scheduled for public hearing. We'd rather review everything, both options, the fault data and everything else in that April meeting. I just wanted to update you with what's going on and what is forthcoming. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. The Ivory representative is here tonight as well. Otherwise, we will, in the next week or so, prepare notices and send those out, notifying the public, and we'll schedule that public hearing for one of our April meetings.
Any questions, discussion? I forgot to mention, we have Commissioner Ebler on Zoom. And
Craig Babin is also on Zoom now.
okay. We have two on Zoom. Any questions from those on Zoom? As
staff, we did ask about the other conditions that were imposed, and Ivory only shared the concerns were with the two that I've mentioned. So the other ones we would propose to carry those forward.
Mike, did they have a counter proposal to the conditions, or just a general objection to the conditions?
Just I think what they will propose as an amendment is the same thing minus those two added conditions. Obviously updated with fault data, but there was no counter or discussion. It was just those conditions are not workable, and we want to submit an amendment that omits those.
If they come back with a typical subdivision plat, what happens to the park?
It looks, well, something like this, where the city's acreage is just the eastern portion.
Okay. Would we have to work with UDOT or for ingress egress off of Wasatch?
For the park use?
Yeah.
If in the design of the park, the city desired to use Wasatch as access to the park, then yes. Otherwise, it would be accessed from the public street system to the south. That would be part of the park design once we know.
You only have that little teeny tiny spot at 7650 South, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't believe you'd get access from Wasatch. The UDOT would never let that happen.
Personally, I don't think the two conditions are equal in my mind in terms of neighborhood conformance. I think the setbacks are one thing and the storm drainage is another thing. So I personally still feel strongly about the setbacks, but not as strong about the storm drainage. That's just me speaking.
I would agree. I would agree with that.
I lean that way too. I mean, there's just in terms of look and feel of the city. I understand philosophically when we start going towards like a daybreak style development, but I think the reason that works is because you've strategized on both sides of the street and then having an access through the middle for parking. And I think that's the only reason that works. They have really large front yards. And so you can do some setbacks that are really creative in the backs and on the sides. And this doesn't have any of that. It's just the setbacks without the utility of the rest of the space.
And one thing if faults are located and they affect lots, that may affect the massing and break up, the visual concern there. So that's why I think we would recommend we really get into the weeds with this when we have all that data, because that may impact both proposals for better or for worse. We just don't know yet.
But we appreciate, I appreciate Ivory's willingness to keep the discussion open, but I think it's nice that we're unified.
And the maps might have a very significant impact if, just coming from the new maps from the state It's really the bottom corner lots that appear to be impacted. Again, they require verification. So I think there's definitely a lot to react to.
Yeah.
And so long as we've got that information, I think, I mean, do you think they'll be able to get the information and react quickly enough?
That's their intention.
Okay. So
And what they shared with me just today is we want to have that information mapped and on there to know how it impacts any proposal before an updated decision is made, because they don't want to come back a third time.
that's sensible.
I do just want to point out this, the pedestrian access is likely lost with the standard subdivision, and the pavilion is, in the middle of this lot here. So, this is still something that the city council will need to decide whether to invest the money in purchasing. Obviously, this type of park layout really is not as ideal as what was previously negotiated. So just another thing to keep in mind is a lot of that functionality is greatly impacted.
How far along in our side of the deal are we with the purchase of that land? Are we past the point of no return?
No, we have an initial purchase agreement. We are waiting on a legal description from the seller.
Okay, so we are still in a circumstance where we could walk away if we chose.
Yeah, the funds have not been allocated and no contract's been signed.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments or discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to the agenda for tonight in the business meeting.
Can I
Or
just
do you wanna
share?
do
No, sorry. There's no public hearing on this tonight. There's a general citizen comment portion. Anyone that wants to comment on that, on this proposal could do so there. But again, no matter what comes back, there will be a formal public hearing. The same process we went through will happen again, regardless of what scenario is proposed or decided on. So there will be a formal business meeting opportunity for public comment in April.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And our city manager is here, wants to share a few things.
Thank you. I want to first share, thank you for all that you do and your service.
Put on your microphone.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'll repeat that. Thank you for all that you do with your service around the planning commission and evaluating these things. I just want to emphasize the points that Mike had made. We want to have a park that's accessible, functional, and the roadway element that you have, the amount of distance along that roadway that accesses the park is a huge issue. So that's something we've talked a lot with the city council. Our key point is we want to have a park that enhances the quality of life in that neighborhood as well as in the city. And so those are things that have to be really evaluated and considered as you look at these other proposals. So we just want to emphasize that, and we'll have more of a discussion on that, but they're critical points for us. So thank you. I also want to express thanks for staff and all that they do in these meetings, and our intent that the city council in the budget process really wants to make this work for a park. We understand how important it is for the neighborhoods in this area as well as the city, and it's an important thing that we want to commit towards and work towards if we can make it workable. So, any questions?
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so on the agenda tonight, we have project ZMA 22001. It's a public hearing to receive comments and take possible action on the request from Adam Nash to rezone the property located at 3526 East Fort Union Boulevard from residential single-family R18 to residential multifamily R28. This request also includes a proposal to amend the land use designation of the property from residential office to residential medium density. So I think we have two things on this. We have the land use designation, and then we have the rezone. So how much time do you need for the general plan update?
2 minutes.
Oh, okay. So let's jump into this one then.
Okay, great. I've got this one, so I will give a summary. Let me just get to full screen. Hopefully.
Here it goes.
Okay, great. All right, so as you've mentioned, that there are two parts of this request: a land use map amendment from residential office to residential medium density, and a rezone from R18 single family zone to the R28 multifamily zone. Whenever we get a request for a rezone, we always look to the general plan for guidance on what staff's recommendations should be and how things are processed. So a request to rezone to R28 was not consistent with the residential office zone, but we feel like it still meets the intent of the general plan and is suitable for the area for a couple of reasons, which we'll get into. So this is just to give you an overview of where we're at. On the eastern section of Fort Union, you can see the subject parcel highlighted in red. It's just a little bit down the road from the gear room, which was another project that was approved a couple years ago in the neighborhood. Just came up in a couple of the public comments. So here's a Google Street View. It's just under an acre. You can see the property starts just right about where the sidewalk ends. It goes down. There's a driveway on the other end. Hard to see on this image, but it's pretty long frontage. And got a little bit of an irregular shape, but the basic side-by-side request we have on the screen right now, the proposed land use is residential office, or the current land use, the future land use, residential office. Proposed would be residential medium density. For those of you who've been on the commission for a while, you'll remember that this was a recent change in 2019. Before that, all of these properties were planned for a future mixed use zoning. So what's currently on the map is residential office. You can see on this screen what's existing. Right now, the subject property is planned for residential office. There is some medium density in the area immediately adjacent. And there are some existing duplexes on that property that's adjacent now. Current zoning is R18, our standard single family zone. And what's being proposed is R28. This is a R18 subdivision. It's got R18 in just about every direction. There's public facilities zone across the street, some utility property. I won't go too deep into all of this right now since we're just in the work session, but basically the R28 zone allows single family dwellings and two family dwellings. Likely what we would see is duplexes or twin homes being developed on the property. The lot standards are quite similar to what's allowed in the R18 zone. Lot sizes and widths are pretty close. The side setbacks a little bit smaller in the R28 zone. You have to have a total of at least 15 feet between the two side yards with no less than 5. So the current zoning of the property R18, the minimum is 8 with the combined between the two sides of 20 feet required. But other than that, it's, you know, the what's possible as far as dividing lots is pretty similar to what would otherwise be allowed in R18 zone. This was not in your packet, but we have a concept plan that was submitted by the applicant. We're not evaluating this tonight, but we wanted to show it just to give you a sense of what's possible or what might be likely in the future to see on this property. So what they're proposing or contemplating is a 3-lot subdivision with R28 zoning, if approved, would allow 2 units on each lot. So looked at quite a few different layouts with the current applicant and other interested parties. It's not quite big enough to do much more than this. I think that this is the most likely layout that we'll see with, you know, regardless of whether it stays or if we approve the R28 zone.
Sorry, Andy, you're just showing buildable area in gray.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so that's what's being requested. We've got a little bit of background. I'll just briefly summarize for those who weren't on the commission before 2019. But from 2005, when we adopted the original general plan, to 2019, all of these, it's kind of hard to see on that screen, but you can kind of see the blue, aqua blue highlights around these properties along Fort Union. All of these were previously envisioned for future mixed use development. After the gear room was rezoned to a mixed use zone, the city initiated a land use map change in this eastern section of Fort Union. Essentially, the discussion was surrounding not wanting to have a very heavy commercial or intense development in this, the narrower section of Fort Union, the more residential character that exists on this portion of the corridor versus what exists further west. So the city initiated this change. Is essentially the properties that faced onto neighborhood streets, not directly onto Fort Union, or were part of existing single-family neighborhoods, were left as low-density residential. And then other properties with frontage on Fort Union were changed to either residential office or residential medium density. So you can see the medium density is kind of this orangish color, and then the purple is the residential office. Over here is the subject property. So that's what we have currently. But just to give a little bit of context, as we're discussing what's appropriate here, some of the concerns that were brought up last time we looked at this was that leaving things as low density along Fort Union can sometimes lead to undesirable, either lots being left vacant or maybe being used for rental properties. Those were some of the concerns that were brought up. And so the idea was to select options that were not so intense that we lead to a mixed use development similar to like some of the townhome projects further down on Fort Union, but that would also allow opportunities for some redevelopment that fits the context of the neighborhood. So with that in mind, that leads to why we felt the R28 zone might be appropriate in this area. A couple of the bullet points here. The residential uses, single and two family dwellings are allowed in the R28 zone. No commercial or office uses would be allowed if the R28 zone was adopted in this location. Pointed out earlier, there is some medium density adjacent, some existing non-conforming duplexes. So it would be consistent with what's in the area. The residential office zone, what's currently on the long range plan for this property, does allow twin homes. So some sort of twin home development could potentially be allowed in either zone. And that, again, residential medium density was just one of those two options that was selected for some of the properties along the corridor. So something that has been otherwise contemplated in this area.
Andy, it looks like Commissioner Ebler has a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Andy. I was reading through the public comments and pretty consistent message on this was about height of structures. And I just did a quick perusal of the R18 and the R28. And it looks like, unless I'm wrong, that the actual height of the structure from the zoning ordinance is fairly identical. Is that accurate?
Yep, the max height is 35 feet in both zones. So that, yeah, that is the same. And I think that's the same in just about any zone.
Yeah, I do want to clarify. I think there's some concern that you may see here, what you see down on Brook Hill Drive and 1700 East. Those are mixed use projects with modified setbacks and additional height granted.
No.
Neither of which are options on this property under R28 or R18.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that struck me just from the public comments was it was a pretty consistent theme. So I wanted the zoning ordinance just to validate.
Yeah.
But if that's, I mean, if if there isn't an exception on this project, I mean, it seems like that the height argument is probably less important. Unless I've missed something.
No, you're right. The height standards are the same.
Okay.
In any of the zones that are
Is-
possible here. Yep.
Has the applicant asked for a deviation for anything within R28?
Nothing with the current plan. As I said, we've gone through quite a few concept plans and whittled it down to something that at least conceptually meets the minimum requirements of the zone.
The only way also to ask for exceptions is through the plan unit development process, and that requires 3 acres, which it doesn't, I mean, I don't even think they could get there unless they started buying up a lot of properties around them, but this is under 1 acre, so that wouldn't even be a viable option under the code.
Okay. This is just something that just immediately struck me. Sorry to jump in. I just wanted the clarification.
No problem. That's actually the end of the presentation. So I'm happy to answer questions, or we can toggle to different screens if you need to see anything.
So on the image on the screen shows 3 potential buildable lots. You ran through a series of other options. It sounds to me like the most dense that we're going to get here is a duplex or a series of duplexes.
Right. Yep.
Is there any option where like a 4-plex or something larger would be possible?
No, in this zone that's being considered the R28 zone, it's the only permitted uses are single family and 2-family dwellings and accessory or home occupations. And then, anything else would require your conditional use approval, and there's no additional residential, there's bed and breakfast, daycare, some park or, church, cemeteries, things like that. But nothing more dense than a 2-family dwelling would be allowed under this zone that's being requested.
Just 2-family dwelling per lot. So that's why you're seeing conceptually the 3 lot split there.
Any other questions from the commission?
Yeah, I'm hoping that in the midst of this, we can use this to implement the Fort Union master plan. So curb and gutter and everything from the property out to the street. This is one of those stretches of Fort Union Boulevard as somebody who spends time in that area. And you can see where the sidewalk ends. It is horribly non-wheelchair accessible for our disabled residents, for moms and with strollers, for kids on little bikes. That is one of the most dangerous places that you could be in as a kid in Apple Valley. And basically kids don't go out on that street because of that. So I would love to see however this happens, that we implement the Fort Union master plan if this does end up happening, and that we put the ideal for what we would envision the Fort Union master plan to be in this section, and not just connecting it to what's been there since 1975. So that I hope as we consider it, that we make sure that becomes the beacon of this is what we want to see more of on Fort Union Boulevard.
I think Andy made a good point to mention if decisions here and at City Council allow the applicant to submit for a subdivision, it wouldn't come back to Planning Commission since it's under 10 lots, but staff would be consistent in requiring the proper frontage improvements that we're allowed to require.
Right. Frontage improvements will be required with any subdivision. We're actually in the middle of the process with our engineering and public works department to figure out the cross sections for this eastern portion. So we expect to have those ready for whatever the new development is.
So for clarification, would sidewalk be required as part of this? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just working right now on putting together the proper cross section for the widths of what the sidewalk
okay.
should be, and there's a lot of different possibilities, but constrained right of way width altogether. So they're just putting together some possibilities there that we would then.
Okay, and then entry into this would just be from Fort Union, right? That would be the only.
Right. Yeah. Unless, they get some sort of access agreement, there is that driveway that accesses some of these lots. So, but I think we're expecting all of the lots to have frontage and access on Fort Union.
From Fort Union.
I just wanted to reiterate and kind of compound on Commissioner Mills's statements about the lack of accessibility on Fort Union on that. It's like I walk this road and I walk this direction multiple times a week. With my wife, we typically do a loop from around 2700, and we try to do this one time, and the lack of sidewalks and the traffic and pedestrian conflict made us say, like, this isn't even doable, and so we switched to line sap. But I mean, it's, you know, it's one of these things of we're trying to create walkable communities, we're trying to create mixed modal transportation options, and it's like Fort Union in this section is absolutely terrible.
That's kind of a cool tool that redevelopment opens up. Redevelopment of any kind allows us to, you know, bring other things up to the standard that we would have for new properties. So something to keep in mind there. It's a tool to maybe implement some of the things we want to see.
I really hope that through that lens, that as our public works people are considering that it's through what the intention of the city council and the previous planning commission envisioned for Fort Union Boulevard. I hope that we don't find technical reasons to narrow setbacks too far, that we end up settling for something that's just a basic sidewalk. We had envisioned something much more visionary for what is basically the main corridor of the city. So I would advocate that we do everything we can. Sometimes we're constrained in other projects, and this seems like a perfect opportunity to do something amazing. So.
And those cross sections will be adopted as part of our road ordinance that'll go through city council. So those will all be reviewed in a public meeting and by the city council. And we met with the engineering team to make sure the ideas from the Fort Union plan are, you know, now engineered and incorporated into the plan. And what that looks like in each section of the corridor, you know, differs slightly as you move from east to west, but that's what's being worked on right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Bevan, did you have a question?
Did you say that twin home could be available under either zone?
Well, so I should probably clarify that. The current zone is R18. That only allows single family residences. And R28 is what's being proposed and would allow single or two family dwellings. When I say it's allowed either in either zone, I mean R28 zone or the residential office zone, which is what was previously considered. It's not what's being proposed. And so I don't mean to confuse anything, but you know, if the R28 zoning is not desirable, then that would, you know, we would probably for future applications default to this residential office zone.
And in the residential office, they could put twin homes.
That is one potential option. The residential office zone is different in a couple other ways. It has different setbacks and other requirements. The residential office zone is the zone that exists along Highland Drive close to the freeway. So planning commissioners have worked on several projects there.
Yeah, we've dealt with that. I'm familiar with that. I heard you say you could do it either way, and I went, wait a minute, but now it's completely clear. Thank you.
Andy, you mentioned briefly the 2019 process that we went through. And I remember when we were going through that, there was a number of these purple residential office properties that were identified. And it was strange at the time. I think I asked the question at the time, why did the city designate those particular properties as residential office and not others? And I recall it being a combination of size and also away from other streets. Like for some reason, you kept, where there's an intersection already, you kept single family, but then put the residential office in the middle. So could you refresh our memory?
Yeah, I can address that because I think I was in charge of that one. The intention there was any property, because this was all mixed use before.
Yeah.
Even the corner properties, The reason some of those corner intersection properties were removed is that you start to get into neighborhood creep at that point with commercial zoning, and it becomes a little more fuzzy on where you cut that off and how you buffer that. The ones that were left, either medium density or residential office, were those that either exist in that condition today or only access via Fort Union Boulevard. They have no direct interaction except for a shared property line with the internal neighborhoods there, which is why you see, you can see all the purple there are isolated to access strictly from Fort Union Boulevard or fronting directly on Fort Union Boulevard. Then the impact of any future multifamily or commercial use is only onto that collector road instead of the neighborhood roads.
So it sounds like it was trying to be sensitive to the R18 around it, but still maintaining some of what was possible with the mixed use.
Right, because we still, we don't want to see over time properties run down and become in bad condition. We want to see redevelopment opportunities. Twin homes, that was a couple of years ago, and I think the issue is even heightened today. It helps with housing affordability just a little bit. It's not going to move the needle a ton, but may help a little bit, especially for the property values that we see properties in the city going for. So yeah, that was the intention, is direct access on Fort Union, but still a designation that is sensitive to the adjacent areas, which we think this request also is.
Yeah, I think you have it in your the slide, which you'll probably go through in the business meeting of sort of the staff analysis. But one thing the commission might contemplate is how this request could still fulfill some of the vision of the general plan and the land use map in envisioning something maybe other than R18, while also toning down a little bit of the possibility with the residential office zone where you could have commercial, an R28 zone wouldn't have those commercial options. So I think there's something on that in the slides, and might be a helpful point to consider.
Are the surrounding properties R18? Is that what you?
They are, yes.
Okay.
Even those two duplexes next to it, they were built in the 70s, I think. But those are in the R18 zone. They are in the medium density land use. So in the future that could change, but yep.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 directly adjacent property owners. Do we know out of the public comments if we've heard from any or all of them?
I didn't check, but I know I spoke to several who said that they were immediate neighbors.
Okay.
There's a home and a shed, I believe, on the
Yeah, I
property
think a
now.
garage
Is
and
that
a
what's on there now?
accessory.
So all of that's going to, obviously, it's going to.
Right, yeah, it's a single family dwelling there now.
They come in with the subdivision, we would require removal of any buildings that would be made non-compliant by new property lines. That's pretty standard for the minor subdivisions we see.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, this part of Fort Union. I live near this area and just a couple properties in from Fort Union, and it's really a mixed bag whether or not you get a property that's being taken care of and maintained. And honestly, some of the nicest properties are the newer R28 areas that are maintained by an HOA, or the ones I'm thinking west of Sinclair, or not Sinclair now, but yeah, the gas station. And there's been some other nice development east of there.
And I completely agree. I mean, this area back in the late 70s, early 80s, there are a lot of still some original homeowners that have done some phenomenal things to continue to keep their properties updated. And then as some of the individuals that moved in there have done phenomenal things to renovate some of these homes. So I'm anxious to make sure we preserve property values and do things that are going to be additive and not running towards high density. But I think this could be, if it's done, I'm just concerned if it's done right, it could be additive to the community and not negatively affect the adjacent properties, and again, give those people who benefit the most to have just simple sidewalk going around their block, you know.
And the other thing to note is the tool that we have to evaluate this is the land use map. And it did designate this particular property as different than others. So there was thought that went into that. But anyway, any other comments or discussion items before we go to the next item on our agenda?
Just that this is a recommendation. You're making a recommendation to the council, who will then have the final authority on this.
Craig or Commissioner Ebler, any other comments from you guys?
No, I'll just address anything else in the business meeting.
Yeah, I think that the comment that it was originally designated as something different. I think that's exactly right. It is something different. Massaging that a little bit seems okay.
All right. So that's all we have on in the business meeting to go over. In the work meeting, we have the Cottonwood Heights General Plan update. I do want to mention, and I'll mention this in the business meeting, that in terms of potential conflicts of interest or disclosures, my firm, GSBS Architects, is a sub-consultant to Landmark Design. Landmark Design is the prime contract holder for the general plan update. So everyone's aware and it's on record. My firm is a sub-consultant to the main firm that's doing the general plan. So I've talked to Shane, I've talked to Mike and Andy, and we don't see any conflicts of interest, but I did want to disclose that for everyone's information.
Thanks. All I have on this tonight, real quick, March 8th, next Tuesday, we're having a community open house for the general plan to discuss some of the ideas that are proposed. We want public feedback to guide, the first draft that we create. So this will be a first open house. I think we'll have at least one more community open house before this comes to the commission as any sort of formal discussion item, but we want to hear from as many people as possible. So that's next Tuesday in the community room at City Hall from 5 to 7:30. It's just a come and go whenever you can in that time window and look at what we'll be presenting and provide feedback that will then be used to modify the recommendations of the plan. And we'll probably come back with that and do it again. So I just wanted to get that out there for people in attendance and the commissioners next Tuesday from 5 to 7:30. We'd love to see everybody stop by and provide comments on that.
Can I add, we do also have another event that night, our Waterwise Park Strip landscaping class, which will just be hosted virtually starting at 7 p.m. So if there were any folks in the audience or on the commission who are interested in learning more about the Waterwise Park Strips, you can contact me if you have questions, but you just register on our website. So we potentially have a very busy, civically engaged March 8th.
Right. Anything else to discuss before we close the work meeting? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.